look, it's recording. Okay, number 9, we ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
I think we saw one like this yesterday. The first step of this, though, we have not done before. So let's just get number 9 ready to go here. And then I want to look at that and think about a potential first step. Do you notice anything about that? Anything stand out to you? Okay. Oh, there's 2 cosines. Okay, I like that you notice that there's 2 cosines here. We have not tried this technique yet, but this is a really common algebra step generally. What if I had this? Totally unrelated to this one. Would you want to do something with that? Would you want to do something with that? But they both have an x, right? What could you do with the x? You could divide by it, or we could, do you remember this phrase? Factor out a common term. Okay, so does that look familiar? If you look at this, we're just factoring out a common term. We're going to do the same thing, but the common term up there is the cosine squared. So here's what that looks like. We're basically doing the distributive property, but in reverse, right? So we're dividing, I think you said that, Colin. We're dividing everything by cosine squared. Now what's left, it doesn't just go away though. It's still there. It's just out in front. I'm going to divide cosine squared by cosine squared. That would leave me with a 1 here. And then when I take it from tangent squared times cosine squared, I'm just left with the tangent squared behind. If we distributed back through, do you see that that would give us the first term or the first phrase back? So nice now, right? And you notice that there were some squares in there. Let's just finish it now. Cosine squared I'm going to leave alone. What does that entire parentheses turn into? Yeah, take this whole thing out. Just put secant squared in its place. If you want to do this, if you want to, make this cosine squared times 1 over cosine squared, you can. I'm perfectly comfortable with you making this jump, though. When you see the product of reciprocals, you can just jump right to 1. Do as much of the kind of in-between steps as you need to. Okay. So just keep that in mind as a technique. I think that's pretty much the only thing we haven't tried that you could potentially see on the quiz is factor out a common term. Okay. There was one like that in that 25 to 35 odd bunch. Like I think it had secant squared instead of cosine squared. Anyways. Okay, jump down to number 11. This is the last new technique we're going to try. Can we just get the formatting set up, ready to go? Notice anything about those denominators? Here, let me back up. Here's what we would normally do. We would try to get a common denominator and multiply each one by the other denominator over itself, right? And we can still do that. It's going to get really messy, though. Think about what that product would be. Do you notice anything about those? I'm just looking at you. I'm wondering if you notice anything. I'm not sure this is going to work as an 8th period video. Tess, what do you want to say? Okay, almost. Look, this says tangent squared. Oh, but this one, if only it said secant squared minus 1. It only has secant minus 1. These denominators are not currently the same, but they're really close. So this is not anything we have tried to do yet. Let's make some little notes here. First of all, we are not going to change this one. Because here's our goal. If we could just get the first one to be secant squared minus 1, then we can say, oh, I'm just going to like turn it into tangent squared. Now, here's how we do that. We have not tried this technique yet. I am not going to give you one exactly like this first step on the quiz. Now, from step 2 on, I think you should be able to do the rest. I'm not, because it's just this kind of one-off one that we saw. But I do think it's worth seeing this. Okay, so let's take this first fraction. Now, here's how this is going to work. If I say the word conjugate, does that sound familiar at all? Conjugate? We are going to it's a fancy word for like change the plus or minus sign, basically. We're going to multiply by the conjugate, which would be secant plus 1 over secant plus 1. Because that product on the bottom after you FOIL will give us secant squared minus 1, which is what we want, right? Because then it will just be tangent squared. Now, don't forget, the rest of this, we're just leaving alone. We're not messing with this second one. Just copy it down. Okay, we'll keep working through it. Let's just work through this one together. Be careful multiplying here. Let me throw an extra parentheses right here. That cosine just needs distributed. I just want to make sure you don't miss that. And then on the bottom, I think you would do this anyways, but these red ones need FOILed. So let's just kind of clean up, make that one big left fraction. So we've got a cosine times secant. You could just make that 1 right away if you want, plus a cosine times 1. I'm just going to write it out so we could see the multiplication happening, and I'll simplify it. You could simplify it right now if you wanted. And then we're going to FOIL on the bottom. So we've got a secant squared of theta. Whoa, where did that go? I don't know. I don't know where my page went. Here we go. Secant squared plus secant minus secant minus 1. You see what's going to happen there? This is why we use that conjugate, because it gives us kind of the result we were hoping for. Minus, I still have the cosine over tangent squared. Do I think you should be able to go from like step 2 to step 3? Yes, you should be able to do that multiplication. You should be able to simplify. So let's keep going. Cosine times secant. What's this product? 1. So I've just got 1 plus cosine on the top there over these cancel out. So just secant squared minus 1. Again, that other fraction kind of hanging out the whole time. Now, what we don't want to do is try to change that denominator too much again, because what do you notice about the left one? Secant squared minus 1 is tangent squared. So now, now we're going to do a substitution. Let's take that out and just put tangent squared in its place. See my highlighting there? Okay. And now we can put them as one big fraction. So that whole numerator, 1 plus cosine of theta minus cosine of theta. Should be thinking about what's going to happen there. And then over just a plain old tangent squared. Please don't subtract the tangents. We don't put it over 0. We have a common denominator, put them together. These cancel out in the numerator. We have 1 over tangent squared, which is cotangent squared. Hooray! Pick your favorite symbol.